Welcome to the Backseat Leadership Podcast, a leadership conversation for those not in the driver's seat of their organizations. You can learn by visiting www.backseatleader.com. And now, here are the hosts of the Backseat Leadership Podcast, Geoff and Brad Merchant.
You're listening to the Backseat Leadership Podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Brad Merchant, here with...
Geoff Kokenauer. Hi. I was doing something with the levels. Give me a break.
That was totally anticlimactic.
It was. Do you want to restart that one, or you just want to keep going?
No, we're going to keep going.
Okay, that's good.
But now you made it really awkward.
Yeah, I'm good at that.
So, Geoff.
Yes, sir.
Do you know anything about, the Enneagram?
I think I've read a few things on it.
Okay,
Have
great.
you?
Well, this has been another episode of the Backseat Leadership. Just kidding. So, Geoff, you and I have had many discussions, debates, and arguments about the Enneagram. But, for most people that are listening to this, I wonder if some of them, maybe they've heard of the Enneagram, but are not sure what it is, where it's from.
Yeah.
Could you maybe give us a master's class on what is the Enneagram and why does it matter for backseat leaders?
Well, I don't know if I give you a master's class, but I can give you a primer, right? And so if you're not familiar with the Enneagram, it's a personality test, drives toward a different core than some other personality tests, where many of these profiles are focused on behavior evaluation, on prediction, or communication styles. The Enneagram goes a little bit deeper because instead of talking about just how do we behave in the settings that we're in, how do we behave with certain other people around, the Enneagram is focused primarily on the motivations that cause us to act, think, and see the world the way that we do. And so when we talk about the Enneagram, we've got to consider that as the reality. And I think that when it comes to leadership especially, we've talked about Myers-Briggs before, there's leaders or strengths finders out there, there's all kinds of different personalities. The DISC profile, I'm a lion, you're an otter, whatever, or I'm a green or a blue, whatever it is. And so there's all kinds of different ways that we've utilized this. This one is going to go to a deeper level, okay? So the Enneagram itself organized into 9 general types, right? Each of these types have some general outlines for helping a person self-identify with a specific type. Those general markers include a list of general characteristics, a basic fear, a sin propensity, and a recognition of what your typical emotional disposition is. Now, really quick, so we can help our listeners think about this. When it comes to sin propensity, this is what you are like, where you are drawn to, kind of your appetites, right? The things that you long for most. It's not necessarily like these are the things that get you to hell, right? These are the things that disqualify you from other things. This is just what you're drawn to, right? And we all have them. So the 9 types organized into 3 triads that are determined by the similarity of the types. And those 3 triads are the anger or gut triad, which is the 8s, 9s, and 1s. There's the image or heart triad, which is the 2s, 3s, and 4s. And the fear or head triad, which is 5s, 6s, and 7s. Now, each of these triads are the basic or general dispositions that each of these originate or flow from, right? So each of these types, these are the general ways that they come at it. And a bit of a risk of maybe oversimplifying things, and we're running through these really fast. We're gonna try and give tips and ideas for specifically the types themselves. This is a journey, right? When we talk about the Enneagram, it is a journey. It's a tool that helps us discover things and discover stuff about ourselves. And so I'm going to oversimplify this a little bit, but in each of the triads, there's an emotional posture for each type. One of the types is externalized in their emotional posture, one is internalized in their emotional posture, and one is more dismissive in their emotional posture in each of the triads. And so we'll talk a little bit about what that looks like in each of those. Brad, am I being clear?
You are. So maybe a question for you.
Do that.
Because I am a novice in the Enneagram.
You're more than a novice, but whatever.
Okay, barely a novice.
Okay.
Maybe for people who are listening to this who say, I'm a Christian, which is probably the majority of our audience.
Sure.
And if they're not, we hope that you'd become a Christian.
Yeah.
You're a Christian, and you're thinking, man, the Enneagram, it's not the Bible. Mm-hmm. And it just seems like a bunch of jargon, overly simplistic, puts me in a box.
Yeah.
Not going to do anything with it. not useful. What would you say to that person?
Yeah, I'd say that this is a baseline. It's a start, right? The Enneagram itself is not. It's for certain. It's definitely not the gospel. It's definitely not the thing that saves you. Self-identification and self-awareness isn't going to be the thing that's going to bring you to ultimate peace. The gospel is. The saving grace and the hope in Jesus Christ is what's going to do that. And that's probably a podcast for another time. But that's a reality you have to come to grips with. The second part I'd say is that, again, it's a tool that launches you into understanding stuff about your narrative and the way that you see the world. Everybody who is alive sees the world for what in a lens that we'll call their normal, right? So you have a normal that you see the world through, and I have a normal that I see the world through. And how I respond to those things is incredibly different because of the things that motivate me to see the world. Yep. And that could be a combination of past experiences. That could be a combination of how I have interpreted things and how those things have affected how I see the world today. And so I think that's where, for the person who's like, okay, whatever, why is this important? It's because it reframes not only how I understand how I see the world, but it also helps me understand that there are people who see the world differently than I do. Yep. And when I say, we talk, you can read all kinds of books. Marcus Buckingham has talked about high EQ. Lencioni's talked about EQ. Jim Collins, when he talks about good to great, talks about the greatest leaders are the ones who have not just high intelligence, they have a high EQ, but the greatest leaders are the ones who have the highest EQ, emotional intelligence. And so the Enneagram to me is one way to do that effectively and have a tool that you can have in your tool belt to say, okay, I see the world this way, and I know that there's probably about 8 different types of people who see the world a different way. Yep. And how we interact is incredibly important. So that's why I think this is helpful.
Yep. I have a friend of mine who talks about what you were just talking about this a few minutes ago before we started this, is he says that things like the Enneagram that have to do with wisdom could be categorized as just wisdom. They teach you things about yourself and mankind. What you have to do is take those things and transpose them into a Christian key.
So good.
So it's not just saying, if it's not Christian, I don't want anything to do with it. It's actually taking it, putting it in front of you, and then viewing it through the lens of a Christian worldview. And I think with the Enneagram, something I've realized is that it helps me know what are my instant reflexes.
That's good.
Like when I encounter something in life, what is my knee-jerk reaction? The Enneagram helps me be more self-reflective. It doesn't ultimately solve my greatest problem, which is what you said. However, it helps me see how my greatest problem has implications on my reflexes and what I can do about those things to better know myself, but then also live with other people in an understanding way. Right?
Well, like you talk about problems, it probably reveals some of the issues that maybe you're facing because they aren't other people's problems; they're actually your own. Right? Yep. We talk about blind spots and things like that. This is a critical way, or a cool tool, not a cool, but maybe a constructive tool to seeing those things and helping yourself get over those, and stopping yourself from being your own hindrance, I suppose.
Yep, for sure. Sense. So you've talked about these triads.
Yeah.
And I wonder if you can give us an example of each. So what does it look like if I'm part of the anger triad? Like, what does that look like? What are my gut reactions when I encounter something? And maybe talk about those for each of those. Yeah,
so let's talk about we're going to start in the anger triad because that's just the emotion. Again, each of these triads is generalized. This is how they respond. So in the anger triad, you're going to be more gut-oriented, right? So things are going to come from your gut, and your emotional output is most likely going to be anger. So again, anger triad is 8s, 9s, and 1s. And so again, at the risk of being oversimplified, here's kind of what we do. So 8s are going to be more externalized with their emotions. They're going to be more out there. 9s are going to be more dismissive of their emotions. And 1s are going to be more internalized with their anger and gut reactions. Now, here's how this works. The bonding fiber here is their quick connection to anger. But how they connect to it is what makes them very different because they have a differing motivating factor. The 8 is externalized because they're defensive. There's something about their vulnerable self that if you go back, maybe it's a trauma in the past or something in the back that they have to defend themselves, and they're often defensive of other people as well, right? 8s are dominant. They're the highest energy on the Enneagram. They're when they come in the room, you know it generally.
And in case you're wondering, Geoff is an 8.
That's true. But they're more externalized for that reason. So then 9s are more dismissive. And the reason they're more dismissive, they're called the peacemaker, it's because they fear being in tension with anybody else. So it's advantageous for them to just dismiss those emotions and push them down. And they still will feel the anger. And as a matter of fact, they usually boil up to the place where it's like, okay, the threshold has been met. But the 9 is going to be the dismissive nature of the anger triad. And then we arrive at the 1, which is more internalized because they're always trying to do the right thing. And lashing out isn't appropriate or isn't helpful to accomplishing that goal of doing the right thing. And so the 1s are going to be more, okay, they're going to be angry. They're probably going to be envious. They're probably going to be like, why isn't this happening the way it's supposed to happen? And it's usually defined by them. It's defined by how they think it should go, and it should be in a right way. But being wrong is more detrimental to them than making sure things get done, right? Whereas an 8, on the other hand, is be like, we're going to get stuff done. And they're going to be out there with their frustration, but they'll be able to like work through it to the point where we're getting stuff done. 1s are going to be more, it's not being done the right way, and it's usually internalized. So that's kind of an example. Again, that's a very simplistic version. We got wings and lines and all that stuff, but that's a very simplistic version of what the anger triad is like.
Okay, what about the fear triad?
Yeah, so the fear triad, we got the 5s, 6s, and 7s. And so to generalize them, 5s are more internalized, 6s are more externalized, and 7s are the dismissive emotional posture for the fear triad. Now, this is because the 5s generally reroute emotions out of the way to continue to learn and investigate what's going on in their world. They want to be competent, and emotions can get in the way of that. It's not that they don't feel them, it's just that they take them and they put them in a box over here, wherever over here is, and then they'll go to them some other time to deal with them, but not right now, because right now they still want to investigate and learn. So that's the 5s. The 6s process their fears out loud because they want others to consider the risks they're thinking about. So it's going to be more externalized. So a 6 is typically like a worst case scenario planner, and you're going to know that's what they're doing, right? So they're going to continue to talk about those things out loud. 7s, on the other hand, dismiss their emotions for the most part, especially if they're negative emotions, because they want to rid themselves of any negative emotion for fear of living there and not being able to experience happiness, goodness, or positive vibes, right? 7s just want to be happy and be where the places are that things are positive. And so they're going to dismiss those emotions as much as possible. So that's kind of what the fear triad, again, generalized, it kind of looks like.
What about the image triad? Last one.
Image triad is a bit tricky. So 2s, 3s, and 4s. 2s are more dismissive of their emotions. 3s are more internalized of their emotions, and 4s are way more externalized. This one is like way all over the map, and here's why. You could argue that 2s are internalized the more you get to know them. However, each image triad type wants to be seen in a certain way. So 2s are going to internalize their emotions, but really what they want to be seen as, they want to be seen as the helper. They're going to help you. They're going to come into the room. They're going to intuit what needs to be done, and then they're going to want to go do it, but they also want to be seen as the person who's doing it, right? Because they're the helper. So they're internalized, or they're more dismissive of their emotions so that they can be seen as the helper, because they don't want to be a burden to anybody because they're a helper, right? 3s want to be seen as successful or anything but a failure, and so they're going to be a bit more. They're going to be what I describe as internalized, because they're going to put those things inside so they can continue to be seen as a positive force and someone who's being successful. Whereas 4s just want to be seen for who they are and not as someone thinks they are. So they're going to feel like this desire to externalize their experience, externalize their emotions, and have everybody see them for who they are. And if they don't feel like a person truly does see them for who they are, and they don't affirm that, they're going to hear about it more often, because that's just the natural posture emotionally for a 4. So that's kind of what the image triad looks like.
Makes sense. Something you've helped me with, Geoff, is seeing how me as a person, but especially as a backseat leader, how my natural propensity to certain things affects my leadership, and how it varies from each Enneagram type, from each person to the next. So I wonder if you could maybe just go through each number and basically just diagnose us all. Would you be our free psychiatrist? We would love that. I would love that.
I'm not licensed, but we can walk down this road a little bit.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So maybe if you could start with the image or maybe the heart triad. If you could talk a little bit about those numbers, And maybe what are some key thoughts for each person for our listeners to take away with today?
Yeah, and like I said, I mean, this is a journey of self-discovery. So for each of our listeners, I would just totally encourage you, if you're not as aware, or if you're just starting out in this conversation, or you've never even been exposed to the Enneagram before, it's very, very helpful to start by honestly reading through the types. Like, get Ian Cron's book.
Give us some resources. What are some helpful things?
Ian Cron's book, The Road Back to You, is a great way to start. I think it's a good way to start. I wouldn't say that Ian does, he doesn't bring in the gospel a whole bunch, but he kind of just lays out what the Enneagram is. He gives some Christian perspective.
It's pretty helpful.
He is. It's really helpful. It's kind of like my Enneagram Bible for me, if you will. Yeah. And I really like going back to that. I would encourage people to read that and actually journey through each of the types before they ever take a test. And please don't take a free test, because a free test is going to tell you very few things. It only asks a few questions. But go through and do some self-discovery stuff. Answer some of the questions at the beginning of each chapter. And as a counselor told me one time, try some of them on and see how they fit into your narrative and how you experience the world. I think that's incredibly helpful. So that's one. There's some other resources out there. Instagram there's a Beth McCord runs an Instagram account called the Enneagram Coach, or My Enneagram Coach, and she does a great job of kind of putting it into a gospel conversation. Her and her husband's a pastor, and they have written a book called Becoming Us, which is a marriage book based on the context of the Enneagram and kind of how those things all work together. She does a great job of exploring some of those things, and she's got lots of resources. And can't tell you about this one yet, but there's some things coming soon with some people who I think are going to be really, really helpful.
That we'll probably have on the show.
Hopefully, when I meet them, going to be an evangelical perspective to the Enneagram. I'm really excited about that.
Yeah.
So
Another book that I found really helpful is one that I just looked up. It's titled Spiritual Rhythms for the Enneagram, a Handbook for Harmony and Transformation by Adele Calhoun, which is basically like a textbook, and she offers probably 20 to 25 pages on each number of the Enneagram and how specifically she gives you exercises you can work through. But how do you transform into a more Christ-like person based off of your Enneagram number?
Yeah.
And I actually found it to be really helpful, so I'd recommend that too.
Yeah, it's really good. We'll put all those in the show notes so you can see them. Again, lots of really great stuff. I think those are really great. Let's jump in, image and heart triad then, and we're going to walk through these in actually 2 episodes. So we're going to cover this triad now, and we think we're going to have just enough time for that one, and then we'll jump into the 2 other triads after this. But heart and image triad. So we'll start with the 2s. One of the things that 2s really, really want to be known for is being a helper. They come in, they're intuitive of the room. They can feel people's emotions almost. They can feel what they need. As soon as someone expresses a need, they're often the first one to jump to it. And they want to be seen as that too, especially if they're unhealthy. They struggle when they aren't affirmed for helping. They struggle when they aren't affirmed for doing the stuff that needed to be done for that person. And so, kind of a core fear, I suppose, of a 2 is that they can't be loved for who they are, right? Who they are, they'll never match up enough. They'll never do enough to be fully loved. And you're like, that's really kind of emotional and kind of ethereal for a leadership conversation. Well, here's why that's important. If you're a 2 and you're a backseat leader and your primary leader, your driver leader, isn't affirming those things and isn't recognizing the ways that you're doing maybe you're extending yourself in a whole lot of ways. You're doing overachiever stuff. You're over communicating, or you're over you're just doing more stuff than you're probably required to do, and they're not affirming that. You're going to struggle. There's going to come a point where burnout is on the horizon. Why? Because you're pushing really, really hard, and you're not being affirmed for the ways that you're pushing really, really hard. So the backseat leader who's the 2 needs to remember this, that what you do is not to earn something. What you do is because of who you are. It's not a bad thing to overachieve and to do a bunch of stuff. It is when you're expecting something in return. And so the 2 needs to remember, you don't have to be affirmed in everything that you do. To be confident in what you're doing is inside of who you are, right? So a recommendation I think for 2 is to do the hard work of deciding these are the things I'm going to be about. These are the things I've got to get done. They're usually type A persons anyway, so they typically have a list. So just don't let your list get too long. And the moment that your list gets too long, that's when again, warning lights kind of go off and go, why am I doing all of these things? Am I doing all of these things because I want to serve, or am I doing all these things because I want to be affirmed? And I think that I think that's a critical thing for a 2, and you see it all over the place when people extend themselves that way.
So tell me about 3s, because I have a particular interest in 3s. I'm not going to tell you why, but I may or may not be one.
Just maybe. So 3s are what we call the achiever, right? So achievers are they're phenomenal workers, especially if you give them a project they're passionate about, right? Because 3s don't want to be seen as failures. You're not going to know if they're failing. And a matter of fact, their propensity to sin, their sin propensity is deceit. So like, even if they are failing, they might even try and like, well, I'm doing okay. I'm doing fine. And they won't be completely honest with you. They have that propensity anyways, especially when they're unhealthy. They just don't, they want to make sure that, I'm successful, especially as a backseat leader, right? Because a backseat leader it may be in a hiring and firing situation. And so they have someone else that they're accountable to who can say, you're not accomplishing these things, that's not okay. One of the biggest things that like a core fear for a 3 is that people only value them for what they do, not who they are. And this is because they're hiding all the stuff that maybe describes their vulnerable self, these failures, these fears, these things that are in the back there, but they aren't willing to let those out there. And so the fear, the reason that they don't let the failure out is because the moment they let the failure out, the moment they talk about their struggles, the moment they bring those things up, the fear is that they'll no longer be valued because they're not going to be successful. They're not going to be achieving things. I talk with 3s all the time. I have a couple of them that I'm talking with, counseling or whatever. And I ask this question: if your team lost the game, but you achieved the statistics that you wanted to achieve, let's say you're a basketball player and your team lost by 3 points, but you had a triple-double, would you be upset? And that's kind of a clarifying question, because then I asked the second question. The second question is, if your team won, but you didn't get the statistics that you were looking for, a double-double, whatever it was, 10 assists, whatever, and your team won, would you be more upset in situation A or situation B? The 3 might say, oh, no, I'd be fine in situation B. But there's probably a tension to say, I didn't accomplish all the things that I wanted to accomplish, and therefore it wasn't as successful as, I don't care if the team won, I didn't achieve what I wanted to achieve. So I think it's important for 3s that are backseat leaders to know what it is that is a win, right? To have a scorecard and say, okay, these are the things I want to achieve. And even if I don't get to them, I'll know, like, I want to know what winning is, right? And so what does that look like? Because the 3 just wants to win. 3s are great to have on your team. They're sometimes awful to have as your team leaders because they'll push really, really hard. And then if one of the teammates isn't, cutting it, they'll leave them in the dust because we just got to continue to achieve. And so again, this is the generalization of it. Not everybody's like that, right? And we've talked about this all the time. You hit me and go, stop generalizing me according to the Enneagram, Geoff. That's not who I am, right? And that's true, right? But this is kind of the typical propensity that we kind of go towards.
Yep, today. That's good. Now talk about 4s, because correct me if I'm wrong, aren't 4s the most rare type?
They are. Enneagram? They are. 4s are extremely rare.
These are interesting. So talk a little bit about 4s.
Yeah. So 4s live almost with this brokenness constantly, that they are incomplete, right? That there's a part of them that everybody else got and they didn't get it. For whatever reason, that's the kind of the thing that they live with. It's almost as if I was to draw a chart out with an emotional, like let's say it's your emotional status throughout life, and there's a high and a low end, they're usually living way down low, right? That it's just a constant, it's way down low. And every once in a while it sparks really high, right? And it doesn't just stay inside the normal, bounds of emotionalism. It goes to a super high, and the reason is because they usually live really low. The core fear, I suppose, of a 4 is I'm more flawed and broken than other people, and on the edge of abandonment. I'm going to be abandoned because of who I am. I'm not even going to be accepted. And so 4s need to be reminded of why they are accepted. 4s need to be told and given affirmation for who they are, right? So it's almost like this. If I was a backseat leader 4, which I'm not, and as an 8, don't know that I could deal with all of the things that come with 4s. I do, but you know what I'm saying? That sounds terrible. The way I just described that sounds terrible. Let's just pretend I didn't say that.
You're just a jerk. I'm
just a jerk. I'm an 8. So the point is that like 4s need to be reminded that they're good.
Yep.
And so it's important for 4s to recognize, to speak truth to their emotions, to speak truth to how they feel about the world, and to continue to speak truth to themselves as they go through their lives, right?
Yep.
Because the more that they live in that low spot, the more that they're going to constantly look at the world and say, I can't do that. I'm not accomplishing enough. And oftentimes the thing that's great about 4s is they're super creative and they can tell great stories, right? They can live into people's experiences. And so capitalizing on that is incredibly huge for backseat leaders.
So good. Geoff, we're going to take a pause there. There's so much really good content that you have. I would actually encourage some of our listeners to reach out to you, whether it be on Twitter, which your Twitter handle is
at Geoff Kokenauer.
Very, very
This seems very
creative,
narcissistic
very
now.
Well, you're not saying it, so I can say it for you.
True. Okay.
Or go to www.pastorgeoff, GEOFF.com.
That's correct.
And people can get a hold of you.
Yeah.
I had Geoff come and speak to a group at our church, and the guys still talk about it. So I would encourage our listeners to do that. Yeah. But we're going to take a break here, and this could be part 1 of our talk on the Enneagram. But we want to take a break real fast and talk about one thing.
It's the one thing.
You're
up, Brad. You're up.
You're learning. And by you, I mean me.
That's right.
And something I've been learning, maybe just sometimes I find that maybe it's not new things I'm learning. It's just things I'm being reminded of that I forgot. And here's a sentence that I read from a book recently. The author said, "Your head is for thinking, but paper is for remembering." And that's a subtle, nuanced, yet easily forgotten sentence, because what I tend to do, even as simple as this, I get home, my wife tells me, "Hey, can you do this?" And I think, yep, I'll remember to do that. Well, guess what happens 30 minutes later? I forget, right? And this is why a task management system is really important. That's why I use Todoist. Todoist. I love Todoist. I use it all the time. There isn't a day where I don't use Todoist. It's an easy task management system where you can make it as simple or complex as you want to make it. I pay for the premium subscription. I think it's like $10 a year or something like that. It's just totally worth it. And I would encourage our listeners to dive into that. If you've been wondering, man, I feel like I'm dropping the ball on a million different projects or things at work or things at home, Todoist is an easy way to keep a log of a to-do list, but in a really fashionable yet simplistic way. It has incredible benefits with a Mac or Apple interface, which I use and love. But that's something I've been learning and remembering, that my head is for thinking. I need to be imagining, dreaming, visioneering different things for the future, and then things that I'm like, oh yeah, I need to do that. Just write it down, put it in a Todoist. It's an easy thing to use. I would encourage it to everybody that's listening today.
You're a great evangelist of the Todoist, because you told me about it, and I was like, no, I don't use that kind of stuff. And then I realized the folly of my ways and have started to use the Todoist. I am converted. I love it. I am on the Todoist train. So
I love it. Really easy to use.
Stuff. It is. It's fantastic. And you can set reminders. You can set regular stuff. It's just really good. And we're not being paid by Todoist to say these things.
We are not.
But
I wish we were.
We should.
I wish we were, but we're not.
Brad, this has been the end of episode, I don't even know what episode it is. Doesn't matter. It's the Enneagram episode number 1. And we'll be back in a couple weeks for Enneagram episode number 2. Any last parting good for the cause comments, Brad?
This has been really helpful, and I know it's been insightful for me to learn from you about the Enneagram, and I'm sure as we keep going through each number, our listeners are going to glean new insights. So thanks for your work on this. It's really good.
We'll see you next time on the Backseat Leadership Podcast.
Peace.
Thanks for listening to the Backseat Leadership Podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, subscribe and leave a review to help other backseat leaders join the conversation. For more information, visit www.backseatleader.com.